Today, we're going to learn how easy it is to implement an autocomplete API endpoint for your Spring Boot applications using Redis Stack with Redis OM Spring. Autocomplete, autosuggest, word completion, or predictive search are many of the terms given to a commonly expected feature in modern applications. 81% of people have abandoned a form after beginning to fill it. 67% will abandon your form if they encounter any complications. Google estimates that autocompletion features speed up form completion by 30%. In a traditional Spring application, you would likely use a repository query, a JPA query, or even a raw SQL query to pull the match values for a user's input string. The bigger the collection be in query, the slower the query will be. Eventually, you'll likely add a caching layer to speed things up. Most likely, that cache will be Redis. Using Redis Stack and Redis OM Spring, there is no need for caching. Your cache is your database, and your database is your cache. To implement our server-side autocomplete API endpoint, we'll need some data. We're going to use a simple CSV file containing US airport names, the state they are located in, and the airport code, or IATA code, that three-letter code you see on your airplane tickets. And here's what our raw data looks like. We'll start with an existing Spring Boot application which has an airport domain model mapped as a JSON document with the Redis OM Spring document annotation. The airport's repository interface extends Redis OM Spring Redis document repository, giving us all the usual CRUD operations on our airport model. We exposed the application functionality via the REST controller airports controller, which at the time lacks any endpoints. The skeleton application also provides a simple embedded React JavaScript application that uses an autosuggest component. The goal is to take as input a partial airport name and autocomplete for our user, while showing the airport code and the state, and finally, upon completion, rendering the selected airport on the page. The first step towards our autocomplete solution is to annotate the airport model with the autocomplete annotation. We will annotate the airport's name field, which will be the field we'll autocomplete against. Since we want to show the code and the state for the match airports, we need to have a payload to our autocomplete suggestions. To do so, we can annotate the code and the state fields in the airport model with the autocomplete payload annotation and associate it with the name field which carries the autocomplete annotation. With the airport model annotated, we can load our airport data with a little bit of code in the application's main class. With a Redis Stack instance running, we can now start our Spring Boot application. On Redis Insight, we can see the Redis JSON commands loading the data and the Redis search suggestion commands populating the suggestions dictionary. Let's take a quick look at one of the JSON airport documents in Redis Insight. Using the Redis document repository, we now have our airport documents loaded in Redis. They include the ID, name, code, and state fields from the CSV raw data. We can also see that the autocomplete dictionary has been created under the key SUG airport name. Next, we add autocomplete methods to the airports repository. We'll add two flavors. One that simply takes a query string and one that allows us to pass an additional options object that will further refine the search. Both methods will return a list of suggestion objects. The frontend application has been developed to expect the autocomplete service on the local host on port 8080 at airports/search/the query string. Now we can flesh out the airports controller. We will start by injecting the airports repository using the AutoWire annotation. Next, we'll add a method to handle the GET request. We'll call it query, and it will take a path variable as a string. Inside the method, we will invoke the repository autocomplete name method, passing the query string and the autocomplete options object, then noting that we want the suggestions to contain the annotated payload fields. We can test the autocomplete endpoint on the browser. Let's navigate to localhost 8080/airports/search and type PH. As we can see, we get two suggestions back for the query string PH, Phoenix and Philadelphia. We can navigate to the embedded React application endpoint at the root, localhost 8080. Typing PH in the search box progressively narrows the choices to Phoenix and Philadelphia. Type an extra O, and you'll further narrow the matches. Let's try some other queries. After narrowing down the suggestions, we can pick one by either using the arrow keys and return or enter, or by simply clicking the selected choice. The React AutoSuggest component has been configured to grab the payload of our suggestion, the airport code, and the state, and render them on the page. With Redis Stack and Redis OM Spring implementing a high-performance autocomplete feature in your Spring applications backed by the powerful Redis search engine, it's a simple matter of annotating your entities.